Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome back to the Mixing in a Home Music Studio course. In this video, we're going to talk about EQ. So firstly, if you are new to my channel and new to my videos and you like what you see, click the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to be notified of all my future videos. So EQ. Oh, this is probably one of the most powerful features other than volume and panning in mixing. Most people use it on almost every track. They use it obsessively all the time. So EQ is, most people will probably know what an EQ is in a basic form here or there. It's just some features, techniques, whatever it is, equipment, plugins that you can use to adjust the frequencies, right? So you can adjust how bright a track is, you can adjust how bassy a track is, how much middle a track has. You can, EQ out annoying piercing frequencies or low-end booms or rumbles or any sort of thing like that. There's different styles of EQs in the form of, you can get vintage emulators, all that sort of stuff and different techniques, but they all work very similarly. And, you have your basic forms, right? So you will have a shelf, which basically each, describes the thing. You create this shape that's like a shelf, and it will boost all of the low end, or if it's a high shelf, it'll boost all of the top end from a certain frequency where you put it. You can then have like bell shape or parametric, where it's more like a bell, or even in reverse, the other way, a cut, and you'll reduce or boost, a portion, okay? Instead of a shelf being all low and all high, this is a portion, and you can move it around to various spots and adjust those settings. And a lot of the plugins or the EQ sections in your mixing software, you can do all of these at the same time. You'll have different bands. You can pick a shelf here, you can pick a couple of bell-shaped ones at different frequency points with different widths or cues, as they call it, and you can have a high shelf as well at the same time. You can then add your filters on even more as well. So to explain EQ, it's a little bit easier to do while looking at the software. So let's just get into Cubase Pro, and I'll try to explain EQ a little bit better, and hopefully you'll learn a lot from it. So let's get into it and check it out.
So obviously when we pull up an EQ, we have lots of different settings we can use, but we're going to concentrate right now just on the shelf feature. So a shelf obviously can be applied on the low end of a signal or on the high end. So you got a high shelf or a low shelf. Now a shelf is sort of a little bit similar to a filter. So if we look at a filter, that's what a filter is. It filters out all of the signals below here, or if it was on the high end, it would filter out up here. But when we go to a shelf, it operates in a similar manner, except, let's bring the cue in a bit, except it doesn't go all the way down. It basically resembles a shelf. It comes down a bit and then it flattens out and continues on at that level there. So it's not filtering out all of these frequencies below it. It's just either cutting the frequencies at an even level from here on, or boosting the frequencies from here on. If you do a boost, down here with a shelf, it's a lot more subtle than it is if you were to do a bell boost at this point here. So shelves are quite commonly used just to add a little bit of warmth or thin the signal out a bit, add a bit of nice top end there, but do it subtly so it's not an obvious effect. It's more subtle and across a wider span of frequencies. Now you can obviously bring this as far as you want, and it's going to depend on your EQ plugin or tool that's in your DAW to how you can do that. So this one here that I'm using here is in a copy of Ozone 7, and I'm just picking this because it just visually looks. It's a good visual representation which is useful for this video to explain what I'm talking about. Now, there's not many settings involved in a shelf. It's quite simple, and again, depending on what tool you're using or what DAW you're using will depend on what settings you have. This one here, being Ozone 7, is a very high-end advanced tool, so we have a lot of settings, but I'm not going to go into all of them at the moment. But primarily what you've got in most of them is obviously the frequency that you're going to start your shelf at. It's resembled here, or in this case here I can drag it around on the graph itself. You've got the gain, so how much of a boost or cut you're going to do, and then you've also potentially got a Q setting, which is going to determine how wide the slope is of the shelf or how steep it is. And that all those settings apply to either the top end or the bottom end. Now this one here, I'll just switch it over to analog so it gets a better representation. So we've got exactly the same settings on the top or the bottom, but obviously they're doing a different frequency range. So I've got a song here and I'm just going to play it, and I'll just boost and cut a little bit of the frequencies just so you can hear what it does, but it's pretty obvious. So if you want to add a little bit of warmth to your song, that would be a common approach there, would be just bring it up to a nice level where you're not starting to get the mix sounding muddy or muffled. Find the nice fundamentals of where the bass and the kick are and sit around there and just do a gentle boost there. You can go extreme if you want, but generally I like to keep things fairly subtle. Or if you find you've got a song that's got a little bit too much low end, it's a bit overpowering, then obviously do the opposite, do a bit of a cut there. Now on the top end, obviously we might find our songs a little bit dull, and a shelf is very good for giving an overall sort of brightness to a song. If we find our songs a little bit too bright, we can dull it down. That's pretty much the bare basics of shelves. Very simple. As I said, this one's got a few more advanced ones here. We've got vintage shapes, Baxen Doll. One interesting one here, which I'll just show, is called a resonant one. Now, you may have one of these in your plugins or your DAW. And what that does is add a bit of resonance on the top end here and does a little bit of a cut here. Okay, and that depends on the cue. So if you keep your cue fairly wide, then it functions just very much the same as it did in the analog mode. But the sharper the cue, the more the resonance you get. Now, where that is helpful is, say, on the low end here. If we bring it up here, we've got our fundamentals over this part here, and we want to do a bit of a shelf boost there to bring a little bit more bass out here. But what we're finding is that it's getting a little bit muddy around this spot here because we're boosting that as well. If we increase if we have a resonance one, then what happens is if we set our frequency to the right spot, we actually have a peak here which we can target for the fundamental of the bass, say. But what it also does here is it does a little bit of a dip in the section that would muddy our song. So it can be very useful for that point because we're boosting the fundamental and doing a bit of a shelf across, but also dipping the muddy area. So let's just put it to a normal and I'll show you what that sounds like. Let's go a bit extreme here. And then obviously the same applies to the top end. You may want to boost a certain section and have a nice little peak at a certain spot. But let's say, for instance, you don't want it to be bringing out a 4K. 4K is a little bit harsh and it's getting a bit annoying. So you have that little dip in the 4K range. So there you go, that's a little bit of an extra feature there on top of the basic shelving function. So have a play with the shelf, try it out on a few of your tracks. It's a very useful technique. Obviously it's a very simple technique, but it can also be very underutilized. So try it out. It's a good approach to start with that overall on your tracks to get the low end and the high end right. So when we turn it on, you can see straight away when I click on here, we've actually got some settings with this parametric. We can have a parametric type 1 or a parametric type 2. So when I bring the setting up like this, and when I change the settings, you'll see that they are slightly different shape. The parametric 1 is a bit of a sort of wider Q compared to parametric 2. So what's the basics of a parametric or bell-shaped EQ? First off, the reason it's called a bell is because it sort of looks like a bell. It's basically named from the shape. So we have a couple of different settings here. So other than the type of parametric and the on-off button, we have the gain. So the gain is how high this setting is put to. So it says 12 dB there. And on the graph you'll see it says plus 12 at the peak. So that gain measurement is taken at the very tip or center of the bell, and that happens to be the same value that is in the second setting, which is the frequency, and that is obviously the frequency that we are going to apply that 12 dB boost. So in this case, at the exact frequency, it will be 12 dB higher at that exact point. And the next setting is the Q or Q factor, as in this case. And the best way to think of the Q is it's the bandwidth or the width of the EQ bell shape. So it determines how many frequencies are covered by this boost or cut, depending on what you're doing. So in this case here, we have a Q of 1, which is a fairly wide Q. So the wider the Q, the more frequencies that get included into this boost. Not at 12 dB, as you can see by the shape, it's a bell, so it is proportional to the shape. But the wider the Q, the more frequencies included. So in a massive boost like this, where we're doing 12 dB, yes, it'll be very loud at that center frequency, but it's also a 6 dB increase at around this frequency here, which is about 283, and then over here at about 863, again at 6 dB. And as we come down here, we can get to a 3 dB increase at 1.3K. And a 3 dB at about 185 Hertz as well. So with this level here, with the wide Q and the massive boost, we are covering a lot of frequencies that are being adjusted by this EQ setting. So if we want to keep the gain at that high level, but we want to reduce the amount of frequencies that are affected by it, then all we need to do is narrow that Q. So we bring it in and it becomes a bigger number is a sharper, less wide Q. So now with a maximum Q of 12, you'll see that we're only affecting a very small amount of frequencies now. So if we have a look at the 3 dB spot, you can see that now 3 dB is sitting at about 427 Hertz. But what you need to be careful of, something that is a boost that high and with a sharp Q like that can have a tendency to sound unnatural and cause strange sounds in your mix. Something of that shape is more likely to be used as a cut to get rid of an annoying frequency or something that is really not working in the mix that you need to get out. But for a boost, generally you're going to want to either be a bit subtler, so less gain, and or a wider Q, just to make it seem more natural. So, as I mentioned, to remove annoying frequencies, as you'll see here, we can actually take the gain control not only to a positive state, but to a negative state. So that is where we're doing a cut as opposed to a boost. But if we're not looking for any annoying frequencies to cut or anything like that, and we just want to use this bell to add something more, a bit of a boost, maybe we want to take it up and add a bit of top end to it, then I would recommend that we go a bit subtler with the boost for a start. Plus, I would go for a wider Q. So if we take it up to about 6K and we take our gain down a little bit so it's not so massive, and we've got a fairly wide Q, and that is going to sound more natural and more musical than a very sharp peak will. So the primary purpose of using a bell or parametric EQ is to target specific frequency ranges in an audio source, as opposed to a shelf where you are targeting lots of frequencies below or above a point where you boost. So a bell is to target specific frequency areas to boost or cut. So I've got a song here and we're just going to play around with a few different settings to just give you an idea of sound and how we could use it and what impact it will have on that song. So we'll start with an EQ sitting around here, around the 490 to 500 Hertz, 6 dB, very wide Q, and we'll just give that a shot, see how it goes. We'll start with it off for the moment. And while the song's playing, I will turn it on and off several times just so you can hear the impact of it, and it is boosting the frequencies so you can see what that sounds like. So what if we put two EQ settings at the same spot? So I'll just adjust these to get them exact. So we'll make it 500 Hertz with a 6 dB increase. And we'll do one with a Q of 1 and one with a Q of 12. And what I'm going to do as the song's playing, I'll switch between the two and off so you can hear the difference between what the Q is doing. Now, actually, that's a little bit subtle, so I'm going to push this up to 12 dB, just so it's a lot more obvious and extreme. So you'll hear there's a massive difference between the two. This sharp Q1 here, you can only hear a frequency boost being happen at the specific range that's very narrow. Whereas the other one, such a wide Q, you can hear such a massive difference between the frequencies, affecting a lot more frequencies. Now, originally I said that a wider Q sounds more natural, and generally that is the case, but in this case here it's not. And that's because we're doing such a massive boost and we are affecting so many frequencies at such a high level that it does sound weird and unusual. So if we now take this down to a negative range and set them both to be the same, so you can get an idea of how it sounds doing the same thing, but with a cut. So that should give you an idea of what the difference sounds like. But now let's have a look at something a little bit more realistic. So let's add a little bit of brightness to this track. So let's take it up to about 6K and we'll set it to about 3 dB increase. So once again, let's have another listen with this settings. So you can hear here with the wider Q, we're getting a nice little bit of a boost in the brightness and it's sounding good. But with the narrower Q1, we're not really getting any of that effect at all. We can't quite hear it. So to get brightness out of a narrow Q like that, I think we'd have to go a lot higher with our gain setting. And you'll hear there when I do that, to get sort of a bit of more brightness, it doesn't sound good. It's sounding unnatural. It's getting a weird sort of sound. And it's because it's such a narrow Q, it's really only boosting a specific small frequency range, which is going to be sort of one tiny little element. So it's bringing out sort of an unnatural sound because you're not quite brightening the track up as such. So basically you need to use your ears to determine what setting is most appropriate. And you're not locked into using a Q of 1 or 12. There is many settings in between. So you can select the appropriate Q to get the results that you are after. So the first step really is to find the frequency that you want to target with this EQ setting. And that could be anywhere. It could be down here at some low end here. You might have a bit of mud that you want to get rid of. And then once you get it into the right place, then you can play with the gain to how much you want to remove. Plus you can adjust the Q to how much frequency space you want to adjust. If it's taking too much away, narrow the Q or reduce the gain. It's a bit of a play between the two settings. And, you know, you can do massive cuts there or little cuts. It's all going to depend on the song and what you're trying to achieve and what your ears are telling you. You might want to do a cut here at about 400, 500. You might determine that it sounds a little bit boxy, and you might want to do a little bit of a cut there to reduce that boxy sound.
So there you go, that is EQs, and that is EQs in Cubase. Let me know what you think of it in the comments. Let me know if you didn't understand something or I didn't explain something properly or you need some more information. I'd love to get your thoughts on all of that in the comments. I do read all the comments and I'll answer every comment or as many of the comments as I possibly can, as quickly as I can, so that you can get the most out of this course and you can learn as much as I can possibly tell you about EQ and what you need to know and that sort of stuff. Further down the track in part 2, you'll obviously see me using EQ on my song and using all of these techniques out of all of these theory topics. Well, not all of them, but majority of the stuff, whatever's needed, I'll be doing on my mix. So you will definitely see EQ. And so that will give you some real world examples, but hopefully we got enough out of this video. But let me know in the comments if you need some more information or anything like that. If you did like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to be notified of all my future videos. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.